Well, hello, this is Adam, and welcome back to Rare Classic Cars. Another treat for the Ford lovers. A comparison of this first year 1969 Lincoln Mark III versus this first year 1972 Mark IV. Lincoln's top of the line so-called personal luxury coupes in each particular year. And a lot have quite a few unique one-year only items. So this is 1969 Mark IV. Let's start with it. I've owned this car for about 10 years. Bought it locally in Michigan at that time, and the seller was the grandson of the original owner and was always really well taken care of, babied, in the garage. And I think I bought it with about 30,000 miles on it, and it's got something like 38,000 now, 10 years later. So I really enjoy driving this vehicle, and I'll explain a bit why in a moment. This car I've had for about 4 years now, and I bought it in North Carolina, near Asheville, North Carolina. And I was looking for a 72 Mark IV. The yellow gold moon dust color was not necessarily the color I was seeking out, but the car was on Facebook Marketplace. It was the right price, and it only had 15,000 miles on it, or I think 14,000 at the time. And the price I thought was really good, so snapped it up. So here we are today. Let's talk a little bit about each of these. Let's start with the Mark III first. This 69 Mark III was really Lincoln's entree into that personal luxury coupe. They did have the big Continental coupe in the mid-60s and late 60s, but this was on a 117-inch wheelbase, a little bit more intimate, if you can call 117-inch wheelbase more intimate, and 4,700 pounds of car, you know, somewhat smaller than full size. But this car came out in 1969, and it really kind of took Cadillac by storm, I would say, in this area. You know, Cadillac had their Eldorado that came out in 1967, beautiful design, wonderful looking car. And in its first year, this Mark III outsold that 1969 Eldorado. Ford sold about 29,000 of these Mark IIIs, roughly 3,800 in this maroon color, which I think looks especially handsome and sinister on a car like this. And Cadillac sold about 23,000 of their Eldorado in 1969. So Ford really had a home run, relatively speaking, on their hands, especially given this didn't have the cost of the front-wheel drive platform that the Eldorado had, which was about $500 more per vehicle. And this car shared so many components and its underpinnings with the Thunderbird of the era. Now, before you say Thunderbird, you know, that's kind of some plebeian roots, nothing special about that. Ford Thunderbird in these years was a luxury car. It was really its own make almost in terms of how it was marketed. But it was marketed as a very high-end automobile. And the underpinnings for this Mark III were thus really, really good to begin with. But Ford advertised and even talked about the fact that this car has about 300 pounds. That's right, 300 pounds of sound deadening insulation, from the jute blanket under the carpets to the firewall insulation to the insulation behind the package shelf. It has a ridiculous amount of sound insulation. And I would say even above and beyond the Thunderbird that it was based on. And the car was, as I mentioned, based on the Thunderbird, but the design brief really was originated from Lee Iacocca for this car, and it was to take a Rolls-Royce grille and put it on a Lincoln. And the designers hated this idea, just abhorred it. And yet, Lee Iacocca turned out to be right, obviously given the sales of the car. And you know, it's not that hard to imagine, once we look around it a little bit more, why the car was such a good sales success and why it took that sales crown from the Eldorado early on. Now, the Mark III was only made from 1969 to 1971. 1969 is the only year with the exposed wipers. The later years have the wipers hidden. There are also some other unique elements. The interior on the 69s is 1 year only. 70 got a new interior. You can tell the 71s because the seats were new and they had higher back seats in 1971. But 69 is also, I would say, even though all 3 years are rated at the same 365 horsepower from the premium fuel 460 V8 underhood, this one's the one that really has the least smog equipment and is the peppiest of them, even though the gross horsepower rating was about the same. So tremendously successful vehicle for Lincoln. And then when it came to follow it up in 1972 with the Mark IV, what's amazing about the Mark IV is that it has so many similar styling elements as the Mark III, but it executes them in completely different ways. If you look at the Mark III, it's very angular, almost designed with a T-square, if you will. This fender is perfectly straight, which actually in side view gives it this look that it's almost angling upward. Just a trick that your eyes play on you. And similar to why the Greeks and the Romans would have the columns kind of tapered at the top of their various buildings so that they appeared straight. It's just a trick your eye plays on you. The Mark IV kind of resolves these issues and has this diving fender line. It also curves inward at the front edge. The back of the car also curves inward. And it has these subtle creases on it. Unfortunately, on many cars ruined by this, this rub strip here. It was part of, I think, the appearance protection group. But, what are you going to do? Almost all of these cars had it. So 72 was the first year for the Mark IV, and it was again based on the Thunderbird platform, but the Thunderbird platform was all new in 1972, and it shared a lot of Torino-based components. So it really took this Mark III, which to my mind is the high watermark for Ford. I can't think of another mass-produced Ford that has the level of build quality as the Mark III, and we'll go around it and describe a bit why. The Mark IV is still a nice car, and I would say in terms of its assembly quality, better than the Eldorado of the era, but the materials are not quite the same. You still get the really nice Ford, door opening and closing sounds that you have in the Mark III, but it doesn't have the same level of rigidity. The door panels are a bit more frail. If you feel like almost if you slam the door panels are going to pull apart a little bit. And that's just, unfortunately, the material quality that was used. Interestingly, though, while this car sold 29,000 units in 1969, the first year of the Mark IV sold 49,000 units. Just dusted the Eldorado in terms of sales, even though the Eldorado had the convertible. And it took, again, Cadillac by storm even more. Lincoln took this personal luxury crown, really, from them. And having owned Eldorados of this era from 1971 to 78, which would be the body style that competed with the Mark IV, and also having owned Eldorados from 1967 to 70, which would be the body style that competed with this Mark III, I will say from a driving experience, there really is no comparison between these and the Eldorados. These drive infinitely better, especially the Mark III. Much more solid, much more road isolation, much better suspension, much better material quality, especially on this one. This one, not quite as much, but still better. And the Eldorados, unfortunately, while I think they had great styling, the driving experience just wasn't what buyers had become accustomed to from a luxury car. So let's take the camera off and talk a little bit more about each and some of the details. Okay, so let's start with this 1969 Mark III. As I mentioned, 69 is the only year with the exposed wipers, and they're powered off of the power steering pump. They're hydraulic wipers. It is not an electric motor. It was the same with the Thunderbird in the era. And it's good and bad. The one good thing is, as opposed to having delay wipers, they have a control on the dash that you turn, and it basically opens and closes an orifice, and that enables continuously variable speed. So you can have the wipers wipe very slowly, or you can have them wipe very fast. That was the advantage of that system, but they're not electric. This hood ornament is not correct. These cars did not come with a hood ornament. When I bought this car, it had one on it. I've left it because a number of the original clays for this design had that exact hood ornament on it. So the reason why it was left off, I'm presuming, is because of safety. Remember, this was the era of Ralph Nader, unsafe at any speed. Hood ornaments were viewed as being potential impalers of pedestrians. And so a lot of car companies took them off, Cadillac as well, until they reappeared, like on the Mark IV. That is correct. This car was originally from Connecticut, No commentary on what it might have been used for in Connecticut. And I have the original sales receipt. The first owner paid cash. So we'll just leave it at that. Again, this is maroon paint with dark red leather interior. 1 year only interior. This car does have the optional headrest. It does have power door locks, 8-track tape player, tilt wheel, cruise control, automatic climate control, power antenna. And these are probably the thickest doors on any American car that I have ever seen. This door is tremendously thick, at least an inch thicker than the Mark IV door. And the amazing thing about it is it just closes so effortlessly. You know, let's see if it'll close. Oh, not quite. Gotta give it a little more oomph. There we go. Beautiful bank vault-like sound. These in 1969, you could get them 1 year only without the vinyl roof. Very rare option. Ford didn't want to do it because this is a two-piece roof, seam down the middle, and the vinyl roof was able to disguise the fact that they didn't have to have fine metal finishing all over that entire seam. These do have a real big tendency to bubble all up and down here. This car is in really nice shape. It was always garage. This Cavalry 12 top is original. You can tell if these tops are original on the Mark IIIs and IVs because they're padded on the side and not left of the seam or inboard of the seam on this side. It does have these interesting wheel covers with the single nut. Some people said the inspiration was the racing vehicles of the time. Could also be Rolls Royces and expensive 1920s cars. That theme would be repeated on the Mark IV, just in a different way. I like to think of it as a single lug nut from a racing vehicle, because these cars clearly are race cars. And let's take a look inside. Just a beautiful door panel. Again, 1 year only, kind of, casket-like, if you will. Have the safety door handle that you pull to open it here. Does have the power seat adjuster on both sides. Ford quality control was so good on these that the designers wanted this gathered leather look. This is actually purposefully kind of bunchy here, and it also is in a number of areas on the seat. You can see it there in the passenger seat as well. But they were rejecting these at the Wixom assembly plant because they thought it was a manufacturing defect, and it really wasn't. You can see this was supposed to have more of a gathered leather look, but this back seat doesn't. And you can also tell this is an early 69 model because it has the white face gauges. They would go to the orange needles later that year. They also have different steering wheels even earlier in the year. They have a little design in the back seat later. A lot of little intra-year 1969 differences as well on these vehicles. So if you see different gauge needles and things on the 69 or a different steering wheel, it is correct. That's just how they were built. So let's get inside here. This is the 8-track tape player. You have up here the control for, one is a dome light, this one. There you go. And then if you want to operate the power antenna, that's what this one is for, to extend it. So it's down right now. And then over here we have a vent for the rear. You can open and close it by rotating that control. It opens a vent on the rear package shelf. So if you're smoking, it'll exhaust the air out the back tulip panel. Kind of handy. This is the control for the wiper I was talking about that you rotate here for variable speeds. Full complement of gauges: oil pressure gauge, fuel pressure gauge, alternator gauge, temperature gauge, which is great. That would go away in the Mark IV. They go to idiot lights. Here's the 8-track tape player. As I mentioned, automatic climate control with high and low speeds. I think a 4 or 5 speed fan within each of those positions. This car does have the automatic headlamp dimming, which you can turn this little dial here and have it switch from dimming the headlights automatically near or far away. That's what that little thing is on the front. It's to sense the oncoming headlights. Cruise control is kind of cool. You push this thing forward and then you push the end button on the turn signal stalk to activate it. Just an interesting little feature. You know, you flick this switch to turn it off or step on the brake. These do have this little light panel up here. So you can see if I turn the key on, it says the door is ajar, buckle the seat belts. The seatbelt light will go out, I think, after about 5 seconds. There's a trunk open light, that's the far right light. And this is for the headlamps to tell you if they didn't open all the way. So if I turn the headlights on, that will illuminate until the headlight door is fully open. And it goes out when they're open. This does have vacuum operated headlamp doors. You can hear the control hissing. The car also does have vacuum operated, I'll close the door here, door locks. So you can push this button and you'll hear it. Watch the door lock. Hear the little release of air there. Pretty cool. Ford loved vacuum in this era. And another goofy thing about this car, for '69 only, they put the key down here. It would go to the column later with the column lock. There's no column lock on this car. That's the anti-theft feature for this car, trying to find where you put the key in. Pretty goofy setup. I do like that on this window control panel, which would go away on the Mark IV, they have this bypass button, which you don't have to have the key on. You just hold it, and then you can operate a window. Pretty handy. You just hold it down and operate it. If I try to operate it now, nothing happens. But if I hold the bypass down and operate it, so pretty handy. Lots of cool features in this vehicle. This car still has its original air conditioning compressor charged on R12, and it is freezing cold. Drove it today. Car sat for about a year, haven't had it out all year. Operates just perfectly. Let's take a look under hood. And here it is, the Premium Fuel 460 4 Venturi. That's what the 4V stands for, 4-barrel carburetor. 365 horsepower. It would be 365 horsepower in 69, 70, and 71. And then in 1972, they changed to net horsepower ratings and low compression, and it would go down to 202 horsepower, I believe, in the Mark IVs and 212 in the full-size Continentals. They were so proud of the horsepower, in fact, that it says here 365 horsepower, 4,600 RPM. On the plaque under that car, it doesn't mention the horsepower. Wah wah. Interesting thing about the 69s as well, can you find the power steering pump? Where is it? If you said that, you're incorrect. That's just a reservoir for the power steering. There's no accessory drive there. These cars and the MEL engines as well for Lincoln have the power steering driven off the end of the crankshaft. Kind of a crazy setup, and that also powers the windshield wipers. This is the original air conditioning, as I said, charged on R12. Works wonderfully. You can see all these vacuum canisters here for all the various systems, including the headlamp actuators. There's the motor. These are not fun to change on this car. Other interesting thing about the 69s, when I got the car, it was overcharging the battery. And I thought, oh, no problem, I'll just change the voltage regulator. And then I was looking for the voltage regulator in the engine compartment, couldn't find one. Well, it's on the back of the alternator. It's a separate piece on the back of the alternator. So if you're having that problem, that's where you can find it. And we'll take a look at the trunk. And here we have the trunk. There's the vent for the interior passenger compartment vent. This is the spare tire. These came with triple stripe. I can't really get this off very easily, but that's the original spare. Triple stripe, Goodyear, non-radial tires. The next year, this was the first car, I believe, first American car to have Michelin radials standard. But really deep trunk. Nicely trimmed as well. And it makes a great sound when you close it. Of course, you have to have the faux Continental spare tire hump. Doesn't serve any purpose, just looks. All right, well, a little bit of a rain delay. But here we are with the Mark IV. So many similar styling elements, yet so different from the Mark III. Much more rounded forms. You got some tumble home to the sides here. You also have a drooping fender line, drooping rear quarter line. Mark III is quite angular, and the wheel arches are also different. They kind of grow, as you can see there, front to back on the Mark III. Very straight front fender line. And here you can see it kind of tapers down. You also can see, if I back up, Ford's design philosophy of these massive overhangs, front and rear, almost equal front overhangs. The Mark V, I think, would take this to even a greater extreme. This despite a 120-inch wheelbase. The Mark IV introduced these opera windows. They were optional in '72, later became standard. They do help with visibility because this is a really large C-pillar, and there's no side view mirror on this side, so they actually do help quite a bit. Now, when you get these, though, the rear window only retracts this far, about an inch. That's it. You can see the little line here, the grease, where that window stops when it's pulled back. That is one downside. This car does have power locks, but by this year they were electric and they don't have the control on the door anymore. Ford went to this odd setup where Chrysler also did this, where you push the lock down or pull it up and this other side mirrors the action. So you go like this and watch. Which is good if you only lock and unlock the door when you get out or into the car. But if you are somebody who likes to lock the car when you're in it, you kind of have to awkwardly reach backward to unlock it to let somebody else in. And a few years later, they get rid of that and go to a control on the door. This car does have the faux Continental hump as well, carried into the bumper, just like the Mark III. Serves no purpose other than aesthetics. And as we turn to the inside, you can see it's just not as rich of an interior as it was in the 69. The 69 does have faux wood grain. The 70 and 71 have real wood grain. This goes back to faux with some faux burl pattern and another pattern wood. Not my favorite IP theme. Very boxy picture frames. Very tall. The only car that I have where if you sit in the driver's seat, you can't see the brake pedal. You can see, you can't even see it now. This IP extends so low. It's not really an issue because you know where it is by feel, but it is a bit strange. And here's the door. Notice the door panel isn't as ornate as the 69 Mark III as well. And they went to some more common switchgear. Kind of the standard Ford switchgear, if you will. Make sure, by the way, some people have seen these catch on fire, the seat switches. Make sure all your contacts are clean. Take this apart, just take that screw out. This is spring-loaded back here. Pull up the trim piece and make sure that your contacts are all just fine. This seat switch is hot all the time. I always disconnect the car when I leave it for long periods of time, just to make doubly sure that nothing happens. And for an amazingly large car, the back seat is not very big. And you have this really kind of gunslit greenhouse here where you don't have much distance from the top of the door to the roof, nor from the top of the IP to the roof. So it makes it it's kind of like a modern day Camaro in terms of the feeling when you sit inside this. Ford did that on a lot of their coupes of the era, including the full-size coupes. GM never did until more recent years. Not a lot of headroom And it kind of gives you this feeling of a somewhat cramped cabin. Let's take a look under hood. This was also the first year that this new Lincoln logo was introduced. The slim one that they would continue for many years. And here we have the regular fuel, 464 Venturi, 202 horsepower, 212 in the big Continentals. Notice on this plaque, it says nothing about the horsepower anymore. It just says the fuel grade now instead. Wow, you know, got to have 91 minimum octane and 12-volt electrical system. And the transmission ratios. Ford also switched to GM's A6 air conditioning compressor this year and Harrison HVAC. For whatever reason, they didn't think that they could get the other system to perform as well. And the GM systems were the best in the day, truthfully, and did have more capacity versus the other systems. Although I will say on my Mark III, I find it icy cold. It was 85 degrees today, had the air on, blower wasn't even on high, very cold, no issues. Also a GM Saginaw power steering pump too, I believe. So for the Blue Oval fans, sorry, there's some GM components under hood. That's how they came. These cars do have really good build quality. The external Class A surface sheet metal was made by the Budd Company because they were able to produce a cost-effective, high-quality stamping. And again, you have that wonderful door closure on the Fords where you just kind of gently close it and it clicks closed. Turning to the trunk. And it's not very big. I've got a car cover that takes up most of it. Some spare parts and things here from when I was working on a few things. A bag with some of the original parts. This car only has 15,000 miles, so I've kept most of those. It's nicely trimmed though. Much nicer than the Eldorados of the era. But it's not very big. I mean, this is not a big trunk. It's not deep either like the Mark III because the fuel tank is now under here. And the fuel fill, supposed to be on the side, is behind the license plate. On the Mark IV, it's on the driver's side. So that's a look at the 72 Mark IV. Hope you enjoyed this comparison. Stay tuned for a drive of both vehicles. Thanks again for watching. Until next time, take care. Thanks for watching this comparison. Be sure to like, comment, and subscribe. And check out the video thumbnails at bottom left and right for some suggestions for you.